welcome to Movies, Films, and Flicks. I am Mark Hoffmeyer, and joining me are two people whose spells got us to number 9 in the Netherlands. It's Megan Hoffmeyer and David Cross.
How you doing?
Leviosa.
Oh.
Leviosa.
Well,
Expelliarmus.
Well, I just want to say thank you for casting the spells that got us to number 9 in the Netherlands in film reviews for podcasts on Apple Podcasts. I appreciate your spells that have levitated our podcast to the top.
Oh, nice. Light as a feather, it is.
Yeah.
It's just an ongoing podcast, or ongoing spell. I do go on my roof every night and invoke the spirit.
You know, the fans are just bewitched by this podcast.
Oh. If you go back and listen to all the episodes with David Cross, he and I unleash. If you break down all the first letters from each word we say, they break. So we practice the things for months, and then when we do it, you'll learn some really crazy stuff. I jest. I'm jesting too much. All right, so we're covering the 1996 film The Craft. And David, you wanted to talk about this movie. How come?
Well, I love this movie for a lot of different reasons. I guess what really draws me to it is that I went to Catholic school for 8 years. I'm really sort of drawn to horror movies, the occult, a huge crush on Fairuza Balk. I've had one for my entire life. And then not only that, but I think this is a great film that's sort of overlooked by a lot of people. I know it had a very... How would you say this? Like a reemergence in 2016 when it hit its 20-year anniversary. But I just absolutely love it all the way through. And it's made a huge impact on me because it sort of influenced all the other type of media I consumed. So it's like this sort of led into Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I'm a huge Buffy the Vampire fan. But yeah, I just absolutely love this film. And I've always wanted to talk about it. And I'm very excited to get to.
You make a great point. So when we were doing some research for the podcast, so much material came out in 2016 for its 20th anniversary. I mean, so much, not so bad, but so bad for the Google algorithm that I had to search to get to the older stuff because there was so much new content at like the 2016, 2017 time frame.
Yeah, this movie stayed really relevant, I would say, throughout the years. So this happens every now and again when we research movies. So I've noticed with Back to the Future, Starship Troopers, there's some movies that almost have overwhelming amounts of research. And this felt like one of them. And I do a lot of research for this podcast. And I just found countless articles and like documentaries and interviews and
top 20 lists of things that you missed from this movie.
Yeah, and just all the backstories about it. And you know, it's kind of crazy. I always thought this movie was PG-13. And then when I learned it was R after watching it, I went, what? And then I learned that it's rated R because they shot a PG-13 movie, but then they're like, nah, like these teenagers are doing incantations and calling forth, not like there's no devil in this movie, but they're calling forth what? Gods?
There's that sort of good and evil thing going on there, using your powers for certain things.
Yeah. And they just said, no, teenagers doing this is an R. And they shot a PG-13 movie, and then the Harry Potter movies came out.
1996. What a different time you were.
It's bonkers.
I didn't realize this was R. That drives me crazy because it's really there's nothing really bloody about it except the helmets man getting hit by a car.
Yeah, that dummy got ran over.
Oh yeah, his head gets smushed, and then it's not smushed, which is probably better for the viewers.
So I wanted to ask you, Mark. What did you think when I pitched this film?
No, so you and I, we cover funky movies, man. We've gone back. I mean, but also we've watched Night of the Comet that you pitched to me. We've talked about like kind of other movies with wolfmen and with mummies and vampires, and we've covered just a pretty funky selection of films. So this was right up your alley, and also. I mean, it's a cult classic. I think it's worthy to be talked about.
Is it an occult classic?
Oh, I mean, it's a cult and a cult classic. And the Blumhouse movie's coming out on the 28th, and you're much more, what's not relevant, you're much more timely than I ever am.
Hip to the trend.
Yeah, so you like to release things when people should release things, and I just release them when I want. So...
That's a great compliment for his career, by the way. The man knows his content strategy.
Yeah, so you know content strategy. I'm willy-nilly. So, I know. Hey, wait, real quick. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. What's your favorite episode?
My favorite episode?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's sort of hard. I could be trolly and do the swim episode, but I know that's everyone's least favorite episode. Yeah, so I think it's the one with the silent. It's all silent, or it's mostly silent, and the demons are feeding off the kids in the hospital.
Got it. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's always in everyone's like top 5. Yeah, it all sort of blends into me. Like I could talk about the specific characters a lot more than the specific episodes.
I've told this story many times, but I was at a Walmart late one night after going to the bar, and I saw Buffy season 3 sitting at a Walmart, and it was about $45 because they used to be really expensive back then. But I'm like, I'm gonna buy it. So I bought Buffy season 3. I hadn't watched
season 3.
I hadn't watched the other ones, and I watched it, and I really liked it. And I think the episode I like is the one where Xander is running around by himself. And then,
oh, it's so good.
Yeah, where he's the hero of it, just the kind of nerd, and then there's like interactions with Faith, and then the zombies, and that. So I knew nothing about the prior shows. I just knew season 3. So I'm gonna say that episode from season 3 that's Xander centered. I like that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's like David. They sort of all blend together. I remember moments, but not truly the episodes. I watched it when it was on TV, so it was back in the day of, we didn't have DVDs and DVRs and all that stuff. So if you were out of town and you were going to miss an episode, you either had to set a cassette tape to record, or you had to call a friend and be like, can you record this episode of Buffy on this channel at this time? Because that was your only shot.
Oh yeah, you told me that. You used to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, I had season 2 on DVD eventually, and I remember watching it 3 or 4 times.
They were so expensive back then. But
yeah, it was a gift.
You making me watch Night of the Comet, it really hasn't wrecked Buffy, but now whenever I think about Buffy, I'm like, Night of the Comet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, there's Lost Boys in there too, for sure. There's elements of Lost Boys with Spike and that kind of stuff, but I watch Night of the Comet, I'm like, that's Buffy. This is Buffy. Night of the Comet needs more credit, and then I get annoyed. So I just want to say thank you. But no,
you're welcome.
So yeah, back to the content strategy. That's why I thought it would be right up your alley, David. The whole shebang. That's why I knew you'd like it. So that's why we're talking about it tonight.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited about this because this is a film that I have never found the right audience to talk with about in a thoughtful and meaningful way. If that makes sense, because I feel like this is a film that could easily go off the rails with the wrong audience. And I'm excited to talk about, like friendship and other themes in this film that go probably unnoticed. And because what I've found is that a lot of people just like really like Nancy, but they don't talk about why they like Nancy, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that does too. There's so much attention on her crazy acting and leaning into the moments when she's being a witch. But I think some of my favorite stuff from her when she was just being a petty and jealous teenager and her friends going along with it and them listening to her. And I liked those aspects of her much more than some of the witch stuff.
So earlier on Movies, Films, and Flicks Facebook, I asked some questions, and we'll read them out later about any questions people have about this movie. And you sent us a question that... Like, what was it again? Do you think this movie's classist? Is that kind of the...
Yeah. So this doesn't come from me. It comes from my friend Isaac, who watched this movie recently and texted me about it. And he watched it because I had goaded him into doing it. And what he said is like his reading of it, that it was that this movie is classist because Nancy is a woman of poor means. She doesn't come from a great household. And then she's quote unquote evil. While Sarah, who is, a traditionally attractive white woman from the suburbs who has a bunch of money, is good. And I can see that reading. And it does really annoy me because I feel like Nancy isn't evil in this film. I never got the impression that she's evil. I always got the impression that she was lashing out to take control of her life, and that Sarah was trying to take that control away from her, and that she should have expected a harsh reaction.
And listen, Fairuza, I think since all these actors were 29, and these schools must be really hard because these kids fail a lot. That's why they're so old. But when you watch this movie, you forget that these are 17-year-old kids, and this is a 17-year-old kid who grew up in an abusive situation, who never had money or power. And when you're a child, essentially, and you've been used and you've been hurt, and your mom is, you've grown up around nothing but dysfunction. I think sometimes if you get power and you're not guided properly, it's gonna go bad. That doesn't make you a villain. That doesn't make you the worst. Like, that doesn't make you the snide villain from Under Siege 2. I don't know why I pulled that. So that doesn't make you, it just makes, it's more tragic, I would say. I mean, this is a character who had a horrible upbringing, found her demise. So, Megan, we never read this as her being the villain.
And I think it's a fair point that anyone can suffer abuse. She's obviously living in an abusive situation, and there are movies where the rich kid is abused and is then the jerk. I mean, look at Cobra Kai. That's all about the rich kid who was abused, and then his life kind of goes to shit because he's a jerk. But
Mean Girls are the Mean
Girls, the rich, abusive situations where they're, quote unquote, the villain of the movie. So, I don't know. I didn't read it that way either. I can see exactly where the question might come from if you read it at a much more shallow level, but if you really think about the characters and what they're going through.
Yeah. And also Megan did some really cool research.
Yeah. So I found this interview with Pat Devin, the Wicca consultant for the movie. And in one of the original scripts, Fairuza was supposed to die, and the girls were supposed to gang up together and, lash back out at her. But Pat fought for her not dying because she said this girl was abused and she's been in this bad situation, and she was literally driven mad by having too much power in her, and she didn't deserve to die. And I think that's a great take on the situation. I'm glad that they ended where they are. And so Pat actually brought the idea of binding safely to the script, and that's why it was written in there.
Yeah, they were just going to kill her off as the bad girl. But I hate when a 17-year-old kid is treated as the villain, because you're a kid. And listen, I guess if a kid goes and lops off 4 heads without powers,
it's probably a bad pattern.
Yeah, that child's no good. But I don't know. Yeah, so I guess I never read her as being that. That was our long answer to your question, David. But I just found it intriguing because I guess you can read it as that, but I don't know. I guess I didn't see it that way. What about you?
Well, I didn't see it that way until my friend pointed it out. I have always more leaned towards Nancy than Sarah and being more sympathetic towards Nancy, because I view this film not as Sarah's film, but Nancy's film. This is a tragedy about a young woman trying to fix her life, and then she isn't able to do it. Essentially, like I don't see this as an upward arc of Sarah doing great. It's just sort of sad watching Nancy fall.
Oh wow!
Now you mentioned Pat Devin. I also read that article, and I highly encourage your listeners to go check it out. It's one of the most awesome pieces of essays about writing or about movies that I've read in a very long time. She's very specific, has great details. And she clearly made the script a million times better.
Yeah, I love that there was a question towards the end from the interviewer, which is basically just one of her colleagues at the Coven. And they asked, how did it feel when your suggestions were ignored? And she said, I didn't feel ignored. Almost all of my suggestions were listened to and taken into serious consideration. Did they always end up in there? No, but they actually listened to me. And it's crazy when you read that interview, how much of the magic side of it, it's obvious that the writer-director was Alan Fleming. He was interested in the characters and their development, but she really guided all of the sort of beats when it came to the magic and being witches. I was impressed.
And she liked the script to begin with, too, that Fleming came up with. She said she was happy that there was no devil.
Yeah.
Like, we worship you, oh, Satan. It wasn't like that. And she... you know what I love, Dave, is they came up with a fake god because they didn't want to do any incantations for anything real.
And they didn't want people who watched the movie to go out and start doing spells and praying to some real deity or something out there.
And
yeah, I just want to make a comment on that before I forget. So yeah, I read that too. And then later in that article, she's like, but it may be, just might be, a minor water spirit. And when I read that out loud, I started laughing maniacally because I was like, could you imagine being this like tiny little water spirit who just screwing around, and all of a sudden you're like, everyone's praying to me. Oh no.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think